Hi, I'm Thomas Broadhead. I am the editor of the Critical Performance edition of the Ives Fourth Symphony. And in this video, I'm going to talk about my experience in Lexington, Kentucky in October of 2012 with the Ives Fourth Symphony. So it worked out that on October 26th of 2012, which was just over a month after I got back from a month in Europe, where the edition had been premiered at the Lucerne Festival, followed by a performance by the Berlin Philharmonic and then by the Concertgebouw. There was going to be a set of performances, actually two performances on the same day and at the same hour, adjusted for time differences between time zones. The American Symphony Orchestra under Leon Botstein was doing the Ives Fourth on October 26, 2012, and the University of Kentucky Symphony Orchestra in Lexington, Kentucky was going to be doing it under John Nardolillo. And I thought, this is interesting, two performances exactly simultaneously in different parts of the country. If you could pull your ears far apart, you could hear them simultaneously, right? And I thought, well, Botstein has done the Ives Fourth before, and the American Symphony Orchestra is the orchestra that was formed to premiere the Ives Fourth in 1965. Then it owes its existence to the Ives Fourth. It was assembled so that Stokowski could premiere the piece. But Botstein has done the piece before with that group. I thought, well, those are seasoned players, and this is a conductor who's done it before. What about an undergrad orchestra, which is what they have at the University of Kentucky in Lexington? I had heard an undergrad orchestra do the Ives Fourth once before, but with the old 1965 edition, and that was when the Oberlin Orchestra did it in 2003 under Stephen Smith. And they did a really good job with it then, but that was the old edition, and this was the new one. Well, in between that 2003 performance and that time, 2012, I had received a video of a performance from the late 2000s by a different undergrad orchestra who collapsed repeatedly during the piece. I mean, with entire sections of the orchestra just dropping out and no one playing, and the conductor having to scramble to cue people to start playing again and that kind of thing. So it can go very poorly, right? But that was with the old set of parts, which had no cues and was sloppily copied, etc. And so now we have new clearly engraved parts with good cues and so on. So I thought, well, I think it will be really instructive to find out what happens with the edition when these Kentucky players take it on. And I called Nardolillo, introduced myself, and he invited me up to come up, to hear the final rehearsals and the concert. So I did. So I got great feedback from the student players and great feedback from him. And they gave it just a crackerjack performance. They were really good. It was a really good undergrad symphony orchestra. And all my concerns about the edition and it being playable by an undergrad orchestra were just like erased that week. I'm like, yes, it definitely can be done. But now let me turn to some of the things that Nardolillo pointed up that required some attention in the score. So this is measure 22, or at least that's where I want your eyes to land on this page. And it's in the fourth movement. And it's a passage that Nardolillo said to me, well, this is really odd that this 7/2 bar is conducted in 4+3, because you see on the next page, we have a parallel passage, which is a 7/2 measure that's conducted as 3+4. And I said, you feel they're really that parallel? I said, well, just look at the bass line. Bum, 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 bum. And if you look at the piano, it's coming in on a chord on that bum, 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 ba, dum, bum. And it's the same thing on the previous page. Bum, 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 ba, dum, bum. And he said, well, why was it done this way? Why weren't they made the same? And I said, oh, it's probably because of what's going on in the BU. The percussion here have a downbeat in their pattern that would coincide with the fifth half note of the 7/2 bar. So when I was figuring out how this measure might be conducted, I decided to put the little dotted bar line editorial split here. But I see what your point is, and it does make more sense. Now, Nardolillo was one of the conductors who didn't feel that there was a need to ensure that the BU played in lockstep with the OU in terms of the temporal relationships. So the BU really wasn't trying to keep up with the OU exactly in this passage. So it didn't matter for his interpretation that these things align right here. And I think it was more important, as he was pointing out, to have the two measures be conducted the same way, provided that they're basically the same. So that's what I did. I simply revised the measures so that it was 3 plus 4 instead of 4 plus 3. Now, the next passage also involved an examination of the percussion. He said, why here at measure 35 his Ives switched from writing in 6-2 to 6-4. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, look, here's this passage in 6-4. This is measure 35 in the fourth movement. And if you go back to the previous passage, it's in 6-2. So why did he switch from 6-2 to 6-4? And I said, well, because it's at twice the speed once you switch to the 6-4, this is the 6-4 measure is half the length of the 6-2 that occurred before. And he said, are you sure of that? And I said, well, absolutely. Look at the BU. And the BU for this 6-4 measure, you've got one measure. So it's one measure of 4-4 in the BU pattern to one measure of 6-4 here. And if you go to the previous page, you'll see there are two measures of the BU to one measure of the OU's 6-2. So obviously the quarter note of the 6-2 equals the quarter note of the 6-4 that follows. And he said, oh, well, if there was some tempo equation that could indicate that on the page, it would be helpful. And I thought, well, that's easily done. So I added above the top staff and then above the strings, with arrows, quarter equals quarter, which should show that you're keeping the quarter note constant between the 6-2 and the 6-4. This is a small point, but if it can help one conductor, it can help many, I would think. So that's that one. Lastly, Nardolillo said to me that one thing that he would appreciate being added to the score was some listing of which instruments were playing and which movements for purposes of ease of scheduling. And I said, well, you can look at the masthead of each movement. The first page of each movement will show you all the instruments that are playing in that movement. He said, oh, is that true in the score? And it hit me, that's, yes, it is, because I went on my way to do that, but not all scores are presented that way. You sometimes just have the necessary instruments for that system that will be on the first page of a movement. So I thought, okay, someone reading the score won't know that I've done that. So it would be helpful to have a listing, as he has suggested, in the front. So in fact, that's what I did. So now to the forward matter, I added this 2-page spread called Instrumentation Requirements for Rehearsals. And it just shows in each movement which instruments are playing. And that way it should make it easier for the conductor and the orchestra librarian and everyone to figure out, who needs to be on stage when and how they can schedule rehearsals and that kind of thing.